Hi guys, I am still in Tamborine Mountain, just south of Brisbane in Australia, and I am still at my friend's house. He's not here yet. He'll be here in a couple of hours. I've been here a bit more than a week now, and staying alone in his house and having a wonderful time in this beautiful, beautiful area. And it was actually my plan to take you out to see the view, but it's been raining all day. Everything is wet. There's a place where I could show you the view and just sit and in the grass and look at that, but it's been raining and it's super wet and kind of chilly, so I decided just to sit here on the balcony of his house and look at the beautiful garden and do this 10-minute episode. If you've looked at your player either on YouTube, if you're watching the video, or on Facebook, or in your podcast app, you might see that it's slightly longer than 10 minutes. But trust me, it's just going to be 10 minutes, and then I have a little extra for you at the end that I'm going to share with you. And that's something that I've done this week. I started my week on Monday by driving up to Brisbane. It's about an hour's drive up there because I had an appointment with ABC Radio that they wanted to feature me on their nightlife show. And I did this interview about my life as a nomad, and I asked them if I could share that here, and they said absolutely. So after I'm done talking for about 10 minutes, I'm going to share the interview with you that I did with ABC Radio. So I've been on national radio in Australia, and it's always cool to get into a studio and speak to some radio people. It is where I come from. So, and the station is called ABC. It stands for Australian Broadcast Company. You might know that I'm a co-owner of a group of radio stations back in Denmark that's also called the ABC Group, or the Radio ABC Group, but those two things has nothing to do with each other. It's just a cool name. It's easy to remember. Yeah, so at the end, I'm going to be talking about my life as a traveler and as a nomad, and sharing a few clips from my podcast. I have one more thing that I want to mention before we get to that. But this week, it's been lovely. I've had another trip into Brisbane. That was on Thursday, or up to Brisbane, and that was to meet a couple of my good friends, Siobhan and her daughter Maya. I know Siobhan from the Nomad Summit, an online conference for digital nomads beyond 50 that she organized, and I was one of the speakers. She introduced me to some of her other friends. That was where the woman was also a speaker on that summit, and I met her. She's American but lives here, and I met her Australian husband, Ed, and did an interview with him for the podcast. He's a true Australian, has some great stories to share, and some insights in what this country is. But that's something that's coming up once I get to put out episodes about Australia. And then another friend that I know from the Nomad Cruise, his name is Angus, and we got to meet on a couple of Nomads cruises. I think a couple, at least one at least. But he lives in Brisbane, so he joined us for a lunch as well. So it was great to see him. Just by pure coincidence, Siobhan also know him. I think he heard her on my podcast. He's also been a guest, but they were in Medellin at the same time, and they got to meet there. So it was a pleasure seeing them all, and had a nice time on Thursday. But apart from that, I've been behind my computer. I'm not on vacation. I still work. And you might have noticed that I'm starting to put out episodes from Saudi Arabia. I already have the next one ready. That's coming out on Tuesday. On that one, we are going to the edge of the world. Literally, it's called the edge of the world, or that's the nickname for a place in Saudi Arabia, just northwest of Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and it really looks like the edge of the world. It's a cliff that it's a 300 meter drop down to what used to be the ocean from this plateau. Really unique place, and I'm going there with my good travel buddy Cynthia Globe, that I did the trip with in Saudi Arabia. And after that, we head further west to a place called Alula, where they have some really extremely beautiful rock formations and a lot of historical. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and really a special place. So that's the two main things that are coming up in the episode from Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. So that's something I've been working on. I've been putting a lot of work into these episodes from Saudi Arabia. And then on Thursday, I have another extra episode. It's an interview, an honest and interesting conversation with a local Saudi guy that's a good friend of mine. We got to know when we met in a sports bar in Mallorca, of all places, and we became super good friends. And he told me that I could do an interview with him and ask him anything I wanted. So we're really digging deep into all the things that people might think they know about Saudi Arabia and the culture of Saudi Arabia. A lot of different stuff. And I thought it was going to be a 30-minute conversation with him, but we ended up chatting in his living room for an hour and a half. So I'm going to give you 2 episodes with my conversation with him. He's being so honest that he's asked me not to say his name. So I'm just calling him Jay in the interview. It's partly because he's being honest, but it's not because he thinks he can get into trouble for saying the things that he does. It's more like he doesn't like the spotlight, and it can just have people think, okay, who's saying this? But he's a Saudi guy. He lives in Riyadh, and he's being truly honest, and he spent a lot of time in the US, so he's got this background of speaking perfect English. He talks 100% like an American, and he's seen both worlds, but he is, of course, most of all Saudi, so he can really speak to the Saudi culture and the Saudi way of life, and how it's different from what's in the Western world, in Western Europe, and here in Australia, and in the US, of course, where he spent a lot of his time. So that's on Thursday. Next week, I might not be able to put out an episode like this one on Saturday, because I'm going scuba diving. I'm going on a 3-day scuba diving trip. I haven't booked it yet, so that's why I'm saying maybe. But it is the plan that Siobhan, her daughter Maya, and maybe Angus, if he can make the time for it. He's a little bit busy, but hopefully he can. And then we're booking onto a boat that goes out into the Great Barrier Reef area, where we're going to be scuba diving a number of times. I'm not exactly sure how many. But to be honest, the Great Barrier Reef is the reason I took my scuba diving PADI license back in the day, before I started traveling, because I knew that I was going to get here at some point, and I wanted to see the Great Barrier Reef. I wanted to go scuba diving, and now I am a certified scuba diver, and I can't even tell you how much I'm looking forward to that. I am flying up to Cairns on Friday is my plan still. I haven't booked it yet. And then I'm going to be spending some time in Cairns and going out on the boat from Cairns. But after that, I'm going to spend some more time in Cairns. I've gotten a contact from a guy who lives on a yacht. He's done that for many, many years. He's actually Danish, so it was kind of fun, but he's lived on this boat, I think it was 15 years. And after he heard me on Radio ABC on Monday night, he found my email and sent me an email and said that if I'm interested in meeting him, he would love to meet me when I get to Cairns. So I'm also going to be seeing Hans when I get to Cairns. But in total, I'm going to stay in Australia until March. I am not in a hurry, so I have more time, and I'm also going to make my way south again. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet after Cairns, but there's so many opportunities. I might go up to Darwin or Alice Springs. I might see if I can make it into Alula? No. Arula. I won't say AS Rock, but that's what it was called before, and it's so embarrassing. But this is raw and uncut, so I can't correct myself. I can't look it up and pause. This is what I normally would do. You know this big rock that's a really unique site in Australia. Sorry, Australians. I will learn it. I promise. Yeah, I might go in there, and then in late February, I'm going back to Sydney because that's when I'm leaving Sydney on a cruise ship going to New Zealand in the beginning of March. Also, I have started working on the next project for my good client Lego. We're doing another podcast / soundtrack. Actually, we're doing 2, so I'm starting to do a lot of research on that as well, and getting things organized. And I'm going to be working on those in the coming month, both when I'm here in Australia and when I get to Sydney. So, yeah, that's kind of what's been happening this week. I'm looking forward to my friend Simon joining me with his wife Alina and their 2 dogs, couple of birds, and now they also have a cat that they brought back from where they were this week. It's a long story. We'll get back to that later. And like I think I mentioned last week when I sat down and ruined his deck chair, he forgave me, by the way. I haven't seen him for 25 years, and I'm going to see him in a few hours. So that is exciting. Okay, let me just check my timing here. How long time? Oh my God, I've been speaking more than 13 minutes. So let's dive into the interview that I did with Radio ABC or ABC Nightlife on Monday. It's not Radio ABC, it's ABC. And this is an interview about being a nomad. One thing I want to mention is that you have heard me talk about how much I love Cape Town, and I always say no, it's not unsafe. One thing that my daughter pointed out to me when she heard the interview is that it was kind of weird. I go on and on and on in the interview about how safe how safe Cape Town is. Oh, hang on. Simon's calling me. Hang on just a second. Hey.
Catching at a good or bad time?
I'm just recording my video, so you're on tape right now.
Oh my goodness gracious me!
Say hi to the listeners.
No, you say hello to them.
Okay, hello to them, Palle. Okay, I'll call you in a few seconds.
All right, there's no rush.
Okay, bye. Okay, that was Simon, and no, I go on about how safe I feel that Cape Town is, and then right after that, they play a clip from my podcast where I speak to the guy Florian who runs an orphanage there, and we talk about how scaringly common rape is in the country. So that's a bit of a contrast there, and maybe that was not the right clip to play right after I'm going on about I don't feel that Cape Town is unsafe. Anyway, that's it for now. Here's the interview from ABC Nightlife, and I will see you soon. Make sure that you listen to the Saudi episode. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Nightlife with Mark Sutton on ABC Radio.
Well, if 2023 is a year you vowed to get out more and see more of the world, then our next guest is going to give you some inspiration, because at the age of 50, Palar Beau decided to take his life in a completely different direction, one which would involve him selling his car, his house, his furniture, to become a digital nomad, with the goal of visiting every UN nation in the world and every state in the US. His travels over the past 6.5 years look like a spaghetti map crisscrossing the globe, and it's only the beginning of his wanderlust. Palar Beau, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Now, you're a radio person by trade. You started radio in 1985. You've been a morning host, but you've also done lots of other things in the radio industry, including co-owner of some stations. What makes you so enthusiastic about this medium that, I ply my trade in as well?
Yeah, well, it started as a passion. My background is being a graphic designer, but I had radio as a hobby, as a volunteer, and I just fell in love with creating stuff with audio and painting pictures with audio. And yeah, it was my passion back then, and it still is. I still love what I do, so I don't feel I worked a day in my life.
And when you're traveling, do you make sure you tune into the local radio stations wherever you are?
Yeah, especially in countries where I can understand what's being said.
Of course.
But if I would even listen to a station where I don't understand a word just to get a feeling of what it sounds like.
Now, you call yourself a digital nomad. I'm sure a few of our listeners are familiar with this term. It's become a fairly recognised career choice in the past decade or so. But for those who don't know, what is a digital nomad?
It's basically somebody who can work anywhere. People also call it being location independent, where you can do work online. And in the digital nomad community, there are a lot of programmers, a lot of people doing web design, just anything where they can work online. I happen to do podcasts, and I produce podcasts for clients as well as my own. And I am able to do that anywhere. And thankfully, I work with companies that don't care where I am in the world, just as long as I do my work.
So take us back 6.5 years. You were, living your normal workaday life like so many of us do. You were working in radio. And then a light bulb went off in your head and you realised, I could be doing this elsewhere.
Yeah, well, the thought came to me in 2012. I met a guy who just came back after 2 years in Cape Town, and I said, I could see that in 2016, both my kids would have been grown up and moved out of the house. And I said to him, I want to live in another country for a couple of years. I want to try that. And then he said, then you must go to Cape Town because it's a wonderful place. So I was sort of saying to people, I think I'm moving to South Africa for a couple of years, just 2 years. And then I went down in January 2013 just to try it out, to see what it felt like. Wow, that's 10 years ago right now. And that's where it dawned on me, hey, I can really work anywhere. I have my own production company producing radio and podcasts, and I could do that anywhere. So when I came home, I put a map on my kitchen wall, and every time I took a cup of coffee, I would make a small dot on the map, and the idea started growing from there. So not just one place, but many places around the world. I still thought it was going to be 2 years of traveling. But, now it's been 6.5 years and I haven't looked back, and I have no intentions of stopping anytime soon.
What town was home?
Randers, Denmark. It's fairly close to the second biggest city in Denmark, Aarhus, but Denmark is such a small country, so you can go anywhere in a few hours.
And how did it feel? You know, you said it was supposed to be 2 years. Now it's been many more years. Does that still feel like home, or are you starting to feel like you don't have an anchor, that you're adrift in this wide world of ours?
A little bit of both. It's the more I'm away from Denmark, the more I love it, and I'm so proud of my country. And I that is where I'm gonna go back. I'm pretty sure. It still feels like home, and I love coming back and seeing my family and my friends. But also I couldn't see myself going back to living the way that I did before. I think I'll always be a bit of a drifter.
Of the places you've been, 116 countries, what would be your favorite city?
It's always a question that I don't like because it's so hard to say, but I would say my favorite city is Cape Town, South Africa. It's where the idea started, and it's where I keep coming back to. I have more really close friends in Cape Town than I think I have in my hometown, and really close friends, and I just love it. But that's what I've been saying before coming here to Australia, so you never know.
What's the lifestyle in Cape Town that appeals to you so much?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the people. They're so laid back and so easy to become friends with, and it's a super modern city, of course, like many other places around the world. They still have their issues, but it's people say, oh, it's dangerous. It's not. It's the only dangerous thing is that if you use your common sense, of course, is that once you get there, you don't want to leave. It's a modern city. The nature is stunning, and the back wall of Table Mountain in the background that's visible all over the city is. Yeah, it's beautiful and friendly, and I just love it.
Well, why don't we hear a little bit of the podcast you produce around the world, Radio Vagabond, because here's a segment you produced in Cape Town. Can you contextualise it for us?
Yeah, like I said, it's a country where they do have a lot of issues still. So they have some very big townships outside of the city. Some are better than others. This one that I went to visit an orphanage in is called Kailichi, and it's got millions of people living there. Here I met a guy called Florian who founded and is now running an orphanage near that township, and he helps vulnerable children in a country where rape is very, very common.
Let's have a listen.
There's a study that shows that rape in this culture in South Africa is very common, scaringly common.
Every third man, black man in South Africa, admits openly to having raped a woman before, and most of them under the age of 14. Those men think they have a right to sleep with these girls. They don't see it as something wrong. They openly admit it when you interview them. That's how bad it is. It's culture. I don't know what it is. I've been trying to find excuses for years. In my personal mind, I can only find an explanation in this whole thing if I go into the very, very far past of apartheid and colonialism and so on, where these civilizations were really, really literally destroyed.
It's powerful stuff that you put together on your travels, and it's probably a bit different from what people might expect from, a travel podcast. It's certainly not a podcast about visiting the tourist locations.
It's also that.
But how do you find your stories?
I keep my eyes and ears open, and I was introduced to to this guy through a mutual friend, and very often my listeners and people I know, when they hear that I'm going to be in a country, they say, "Oh, you should meet this person," and that's also happened here in Australia. And I've met so many wonderful people, and I'm going to meet a lot more, and hopefully can come some stories out of that.
With the putting together the podcast as you go, do you find it changes your travel choices? You know, if I visited South Africa, say, what dictated where I went to and the kind of places I wanted to go to would be just based on what was interesting to me as a tourist. But do you find that you choose locations or cities or places to go to next based on having a nose for a story?
It's definitely given me a lot of experience that I wouldn't have otherwise. So when I talk to people who are going to be traveling long term, I say it's always a good idea to do something, bring a microphone or start a blog or do a YouTube thing, because it definitely gives me experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Let's hear a little bit more of the podcast, this time from a country that I'd say few of our listeners have been to, but I'm sure many of us are fascinated by, which is North Korea. What's this clip?
This was in 2016. I was actually traveling with my youngest child, Clara, 20 at the time. When you go to North Korea, you can't go on your own. You have to be with a local guide all the time. You can't even leave the hotel without a guide. So you get an organized tour, and then you go into the country, and they only show you what they want you to see. People often think when they think about North Korea that, they put on a show for you. All the people that you meet are actors. They're not real people. And on the train back to China, I was speaking to Matt, who's from the tour company, and he was one of our 2 Australian guides.
Some of the stuff that people have told me before we went on this trip is that the people you meet are actors hired by the government and put on the street just for us. On the train, I spoke to Matt, one of the Australian guides.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost 3 million people living in Greater Pyongyang, and they're certainly not there for, 12 foreigners coming through. So they're real people who are living their life and going about their day. I think the misconception that sometimes happens with this actors sort of discussion is that a lot of the information we see from North Korea is through documentaries, and there's a big difference between a documentary film crew coming through. There's more of a show that gets put on, and I think it would be much better in the future for Koreans just to show what they really live like, much like we saw. So it's almost like they shoot themselves in the foot a little bit by putting on a show rather than just being like, no, this is reality.
Have you ever felt that you've been in danger, political danger perhaps, in your travels?
No, I've never been in danger. I'm with the thing about North Korea. I did something that I could have been potentially dangerous, and it was stupid. I don't know why I did it. I just had bought a wristwatch with a little video camera, and we were allowed to take photos and videos, but not of anything military, border control, and a few other things. And then when my daughter was having her bag searched in the train, I was standing in the doorway filming the whole thing with my wristwatch, and put it up on YouTube after. And I don't know why I did that, because if they'd seen that, I'd probably still be there. Wow. It was just stupid. I don't know why I did that. So if anybody from North Korea is listening, I am deeply, deeply sorry.
Well, hopefully while you're in Australia, you don't find yourself in any sticky situations like that. While you're here, what's the plan?
Well, I was in Sydney and was lucky enough to get on a boat in Sydney Harbour for New Year's Eve, which was spectacular. And then I am in Brisbane right now, and I plan to head up the coast. I don't think I will make it over to Perth and the West Coast on this trip, but that will give me an excuse to come back. And I understand there's a place close to Perth called Denmark.
Yeah, I suppose it's close by Australian standards, but it's probably still a 5-hour drive between Perth and Denmark.
I really want to see that because I hear it's beautiful. And then, I want to go scuba diving, of course, in Great Barrier Reef, and go and see a lot of the stunning nature. I'm leaving on a cruise ship in early March. So I got quite a while here to see a lot of this magnificent country, and then on the way to New Zealand on the cruise ship, we're going to stop in Melbourne and Tasmania, and even though it's going to be short stops, like one day in each place, I'm really looking forward to seeing Tasmania because that's where our future queen is coming from. So
of course,
Queen Mary, yeah.
So there's a connection. And do you find, that's an interesting thought that, being a Dane, no matter where you go, do you find connections to your home country wherever you are?
Yeah, sometimes. Not everywhere, but sometimes I do, yeah. It's always fun and to meet people who have settled in another country for some reason. Yeah, I find that's also some of the people that I try to interview and put out on my podcast, in the Danish version of my podcast, because it might not be so relevant for people around the world that, oh my God, he met a Dane in Iowa. So.
If anyone's listening to this and is inspired by what you're doing and your story and the fact that you not only make it sound so interesting, but make it sound so possible to spend your life traveling the way you do, what would be your advice to those people?
My advice would be don't do like I did, because I sold everything before I started traveling. If you have a place and you think it might be for you, keep the place for 6 months and go see what it feels like, because living this lifestyle is definitely not for everybody. And then if you like it and want to make it long term, go back and rent out the place or sell the place. And that would be my advice. But what I find is also super interesting is that I come from Denmark, and it's around the same price levels as here in Australia. Mm-hmm. And I spend less money living this way than I did when I had a house and with a mortgage and all the insurance and the heating and all the stuff that came with having a house. All my fixed expenses, if I compare those back then to what I'm spending on travel and accommodation now, I'm spending around half.
Wow.
So, and I can even do it much cheaper by being in cheaper countries. So, the excuse that it should be so expensive and people say, oh, I wish I could afford that, you must be rich. And no, I'm not. I'm just living the life that I really love doing. And I don't know when I'm going to stop. I normally say when one of my kids starts, quote unquote, producing grandchildren for me. And then they say, oh, you got another 10, 15 years. Maybe it'll never happen. So keep enjoying yourself.
You're making me think, what am I doing here? Why don't I thinking, do I really want to live around here my whole life?
You could do this show anywhere, couldn't you?
I guess so. Maybe it's, well, you've inspired at least one listener, me. I think you've probably inspired a few others. Paolo Bo is the host of the Radio Vagabond podcast, produced all over the world. Paolo, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark.
This is Nightlife with Mark Sutton on ABC Radio.